Minister Keir Starmer saying that all citizens of the UK will have to play a part in the defence of the nation as he launched the government's Strategic Defence Review. The proposals include plans to spend £15 billion on modernising Britain's nuclear weapons, as well as building new munitions factories and submarines. But there's no firm commitment to increase defence spending to 3% of national income during the next Parliament. Here's our political correspondent, Harry Farley.
Up to 12 new attack submarines, boosting stockpiles of ammunition, including these Storm Shadow missiles, and a new cyber command. Commitments as part of today's review of the threats we face, Russia at the top of the list.
I'm delighted to introduce you to our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
The Prime Minister was at a weapons manufacturer in Glasgow this morning, saying the country must move to war-fighting readiness.
Things have changed. In the world of today, the front line, if you like, is here. The threat we now face is more serious, more immediate, and more unpredictable than at any time since the Cold War.
Most think to meet those threats, spending on defence needs to reach 3% of our economic output. The Prime Minister was asked when that target would be hit.
I'm not going to put arbitrary dates on that percentage. We will do that as we did with 2.5 in a worked-through way to deliver the capability that we need under this review.
For now, 3% remains an ambition, not a commitment.
We're going to hear at the NATO summit coming up quite shortly that NATO is going to call for an increase to 3.5%, with possibly up to 5% in the future. So these are real challenges for our Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer to think about government spending priorities. And if they're serious about making this country safe, they've got to find a way of making more money available to the Ministry of Defence to deliver on the ambition set out in this Strategic Defence Review.
We've all agreed, even 2.5% doesn't cut it. What that does is it basically supports all the current programmes in the MOD, but if we want to go further, as we all think we do, we need to get towards 3%, and so we need real clarity from the government on how much they are actually going to commit to spending on 3%.
Previous governments have devastatingly cut troop numbers. The Conservatives cut the troop numbers, and we do recognise that we need increasing troop numbers. And even during this Labour government, they've also numbers have been going down as well, and recruitment is just not what it needs to be.
The Prime Minister's argument is that spending more on defence can create new jobs and industries across the country. Advisers in government that I've been speaking to say they are conscious that fewer people now have a connection to the military, and they need to not only warn of the dangers, but talk up the opportunities to justify prioritising this over other areas of government spending, like welfare. New threats, billions of pounds more to meet them, but for many, the question remains, is it enough? Harry Farley, BBC News in Westminster.
Well, a good place to actually speak to the former Chief of the General Staff, Lord Dannatt, who joins us from Westminster. Welcome here to the programme. A general question, first of all. Is this broadly the right move, the right commitments, the right rhetoric?
Well, the Strategic Defence Review that's just been published today gives a very comprehensive and useful analysis of the threats to our security. And it concludes with 62 recommendations which, if fully funded, would go a long way to meeting those threats and those challenges. But that's the if bit, that's the unknown bit. And as you've already said in your introduction, the government has accepted that it needs to spend more money on defence. It's moving from 2.3 to 2.5% by 2027, and that's good because that indicates the right direction of travel. But frankly, the quantum is not great enough, and the speed is not great enough. And frankly, time isn't on our side. I mean, if there was to be a ceasefire in Ukraine in the next 1, 2 or 3 months or so, then Russia would be spared from the destruction of its soldiers and its equipment. And within about 2 years, given that its economy is on a war footing, they'll be capable and able to strike somewhere else in NATO to test Article 5, the strength of collective security. So the Ukrainians are buying us time. We've got to use that time wisely. And frankly, our government has got to find a way of putting more money into our defence budget to increase our capability quickly.
You've been very open through the course of the day in other interviews. You make the point that we need to go further, faster. You also drew a parallel with events in 1938.
Well, yes. I mean, if we say, which is what the Prime Minister seemed to be suggesting, that we're not going to go to 3% until sometime in the next Parliament, perhaps not until 2034, it's tantamount to saying in 1937 to Adolf Hitler, hold on, don't attack us until 1946 because we're not going to be ready. If the Prime Minister is serious about getting the country on a war footing and increasing our defence capability to meet the threats outlined in this security review, then more money has to be made available. The big discussion now is where that's coming from. Is it going to come from growth in our economy? That seems a bit sluggish. We can't borrow anymore because we've borrowed up to the hilt. So that maybe that the unpalatable truth is that we've got to consider putting a penny or two on the basic rate of income tax or increasing the percentage of VAT. The government won't like it, the population of this country won't like it, but it may be the thing that we have to do to maintain our collective security and our cherished way of life.
That is clearly an open question where the money actually comes from, and perhaps the spending review in 10 days' time give us pointers. But in terms of what we've heard outlined, so submarine building, weapons production, how quickly does that come on stream?
Well, it'll come on stream as quickly as money has been committed to the Ministry of Defence budget, because although the government quite rightly is trying to set out a defence industrial strategy, defence contractors will not up their production capability, will not take on more workers until the Ministry of Defence signs hard and fast contracts and industry knows where the money is going to come from and going to flow to them. So the ball sits in the government's court to put more fuel into the tank, to fire up this engine, and then we'll get the dividend of growth that the Prime Minister talks about. He talks about a defence dividend. Well, that's an interesting concept because for the last 25, 30 years, we've had peace dividends as the defence budget has been raided. So we've really got to get this thing on a proper footing, decide as quickly as possible where the new money is coming from, and then we can start to make progress in terms of material production.
Two quick final thoughts. The first, in terms of the rhetoric used by the Prime Minister today, who talked about being warfighting readiness. Do you think there is a danger there that it simply alarms people as to the threat that currently is around us?
Well, peace through strength is a good maxim. What I don't want to see is our young men and women get caught up in a war such as previous generations did. And the best way to avoid that is increasing our skills of our armed forces, increasing our armed forces capability so that we are better able to deter further aggression from an aggressor like Putin's Russia. That is the best way to keep us safe.
And you think that's realistic, isn't it? That's realistic in terms of the nature of the threat that we face, is it?
It is realistic. A weak person will be attacked. A bully will think twice when the opponent looks strong. It's been said about international diplomacy in the past, speak softly and carry a big stick. Well, we're talking loudly and got a pretty small stick. We've got to do better than that.
A final thought, because in the list of things that the Prime Minister outlined, there are only about 4 or 5 crucial things, and actually housing was one of them. A final thought on that, because that is really important given what we've seen over the last maybe decade and cuts, and in terms of morale for service personnel, isn't it?
Yes, improving service housing for both single and accompanied, married, accompanied, partnered, accompanied families is really important as a weapon of retention. And if we're trying to increase the size of our armed forces, numbers of personnel, retaining trained personnel is a really good way of upping the numbers. Yes, we've got to recruit more, but investing in the quality of life of our existing service people is a very good way of retaining them, retaining their loyalty and increasing their morale.